Sometimes real life is stranger than fiction. This is a reality trip with Ben Fama Jr.
Hello, everybody. This is Reality Trip. I'm your host, Ben Fama Jr. Thank you guys for joining me today in the studio. I got my special guest host, Miss Mesa. I don't know why I thought that.
Okay.
I got my awesome wife, Miss Mesa Fama. How are you?
Apparently, I'm funny.
Funny how? Funny like a clown?
I'm funny looking,
Does
I
that
guess.
make you make a... Anyways, we are broadcasting live at facebook.com/Ben Fama Jr. So if you have any comments, any questions, anything you want to say on the show, feel free to leave them there and we'll try to answer them live on the broadcast. So today I wanted to talk about groupthink mentality and the dangers of groupthink mentality. And the reason why I brought this up is we just watched a really great documentary.
Special.
It was actually a TV show more thing on Netflix. Was it last weekend?
Yeah.
It was last weekend.
Last weekend.
It's basically, it was a show from Darren Brown. If you guys don't know who Darren Brown is, go check him out. He's an amazing mentalist.
Yeah.
And he's really a good skeptic too. He actually debunks a lot of stuff. And what was interesting was he made this show called The Push, right? And it's basically asking the question, how far would you be willing to go? How far could you be pushed to go? Like, how far would you be pushed to? I'm fucking this up already.
It's okay.
It's basically, would you be pushed to the point of actually killing somebody?
Yeah. Committing murder.
Like, can the group influence you enough to have you commit murder? And I thought it was a really great show. So go check that out. Actually, it's called Darren Brown, The Push on Netflix. But what was really interesting about it was the philosophy about groupthink mentality, how you don't have a lot of, you think you're an individual, you think you would always do the right thing. Everybody thinks that. They're like, oh, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. But the power of the group is an extremely, extremely important dynamic.
Well, along with the power of following an authority figure. I thought that was really powerful there too.
Right. Yeah. So, what's up, Wade? How are you?
Hi, Wade. Thanks for tuning in.
So, basically, there's been many studies that have been out there that said stuff like the Milgram's experiment. You guys know about the Milgram's experiment. If you guys don't know, look it up. It's the shock experiment where somebody there's
yeah.
Do you want to talk about what it is real quick?
Yeah, I can. So the Milgram experiment talks about how we will give up our will to the authority. So basically what happens is a person comes in and they're told, okay, there's another person on the other side and you're sitting in front of this not shock therapy, but this shock board where you can elicit a certain level of electric shocks. And there's a person behind you, a scientist, whatever, that's telling you that you need to every time the person that's in another room answers a question wrong, you have to elicit a certain shock value to the wrong answer. And what ends up happening is you see time and time again, people just constantly listening to the authoritarian. The person on the other end will get a question wrong, and so they'll start out very small with a small shock, and then it gradually grows to the point where there's one where if you elicit that shock, it'll kill the person in the next room. And you see over and over again, people turning to the authority figure and asking, should I go on? And the authoritarian saying, yes, you most definitely, you should move forward. And people just do it without most
a percentage of them.
Yeah, most.
I mean, not everyone
the majority,
does,
right? The majority do it.
But a good percentage of them do, and it just goes to show that when you have somebody the reason why they actually came up with the experiment was because after World War II, they wanted to know why so many people were prone to following along with whatever Hitler had said. And they were trying to figure out, well, is it just exclusive to Germany? Is it just exclusive to, fascism like it was in Italy? And it turns out that it's not. In fact, they've done this test over and over and over, and people are more likely to do what the authoritarian says, even though it's against their own will. And that's what I really liked about the Darren Brown show, is that it was showing, can you be pushed to the point of killing somebody on it? So, but not only that in groupthink mentality, and the reason why this is important is because if you're not careful in those situations, you don't understand how you could actually be pushed to do things that you don't realize that you would actually do. There's another experiment that was really good about situations in groups, and that is the Stanford experiment.
Oh, yeah.
Where they took a bunch of college kids and basically they split half of them up. They made half of them, they put them in a fake prison. Basically, they rebuilt a prison at the school, and they made one group of students wear the uniforms for the guards, like the police guards, and then they wore the other group wore the prison stuff. Anyways, make a long story short, at the end of the experiment, the guards started abusing their power. Now remember, these are just college students, and neither one of them have been in prison, and none of them have been police officers before. And yet, when you put them in the situation with the group, they just started acting and started abusing. In fact, they had to cut the experiment short because it was becoming damaging to their mental health and stuff. So there's been many experiments. In fact, there's one more, and I'm just bringing up a couple that we know. That, I mean, some of you guys may already know these, but I'm just talking about for some people that may have never heard some of these, where the group is more influential. We actually brought this up in our film Reasons to Believe, which is the Ash experiment. So basically, it was trying to show that if you're in a group of people, they did this experiment where there's like 4 or 5 people, and they're looking at these lines, and you had to pick between A, B, C, and D, right? And well, first off, they show lines like line A, and then they show B, C, and D, and the lines for B, C, and D were different lengths, and you had to pick which one matched closely to what A was. Okay, so there was a correct answer there. And, for example, maybe B was exactly the same as A, but C wasn't and D wasn't. So the first while, they just ask all the participants what the answers were. Now, what one of the people was actually the subject in the experiment, and the other ones were actually part of the experiment. But the one person in the experiment didn't know that these other people were participating in it. So at the beginning, they would give the correct answers. But as time went on, they started to give incorrect answers. Like, so for example, they would say, well, does A match B, C, or D? And people would say D, even though D was incorrect. So when all the people in the experiment said D, even though the person knew that D was the wrong answer, they still went along with what the rest of the group is the majority of the time. So it just goes to show that we have a tendency to follow the group. Now, some people are like, well, why? Why do we do that? Well, if you look at the beginning of time, like when we had to survive in tribes and packs, and I thought about that. I thought about this earlier today, which was an interesting thought that I thought about. Most of the time, you weren't around more than maybe 150 people at a time, and most people didn't travel very far for long periods of time. So your whole survival, your whole world, everything you know about life, we had to revolve around your tribe and your pack, as a survival technique. So think about it. If you didn't go along with the group, if you didn't do what the group was going to do, they would ostracize you. And the dangers of ostracizing, now think about this for a moment. Imagine you're in the wilderness, and the only way you survive is that pack, and all of a sudden you're ostracized and you're completely alone. You're pretty much alone. You're not just going to another city. You're not just, maybe you might find another tribe. But it was very rare. So basically you're spending the rest of your life by yourself. You're pretty much going to die. You can't do everything by yourself. You're either going to be hunted. You can't get food. You know what I'm saying? So think about the dangers of not being part of the group. And that's why we have a tendency to follow the group, because it was part of our survival. Ironically, that's also why we're afraid to be alone. I think genetically, the reason why we have a fear of being alone or being judged or being, singled out or isolated is for that reason. Because if we knew our bodies were telling us this was a danger to our well-being. We knew that, if we were out by ourselves, now we still have the same brain from, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So think about those mechanisms and how they apply to our society now. And so when you're thinking about it, when you're thinking about Hitler and Mussolini and all these other people and people that follow along with groups, or in fact, we've seen studies over and over with the bystander effect. You want to talk about?
Sure. I wasn't prepared to talk about the bystander effect, but
well,
I can talk about it a little bit. Memory serves me. The bystander effect is where something happens and there's a group of people around, and each one will look at the other. I can't hear myself now.
Sorry.
It's okay. And then, so basically what ends up happening is there's an accident that happens, right? And there'll be a group of people around, and everyone will look to whoever's around them, waiting for someone to take the first step, waiting for someone to step in and assist with whoever's, whatever the accident is or whatever it was that's happened. And it takes actually a very strong personality to be the first one to step forward to actually go help someone. And there's this odd thing that takes place. It's almost as if we say, oh, because there's all these other people around, someone else will do it. Like, unless you have some sort of leader tendency, most of the time we will look to others in the group to take care of a situation that's in front of us. At least that's my understanding of the bystander effect.
Right. So the dangers that this causes is that a lot of times, again, when the group is doing something, the individual can be prone to doing things that they normally wouldn't do by themselves. In fact, you'll see this many times. This is like when you see people rioting or smashing buildings or looting.
Right.
They normally wouldn't do that by themselves, but when the group starts doing it, and that's another reason why it becomes dangerous, is because once you get that mob mentality, I mean, we see it all the time. We know what this is. We know the byproduct
and it starts
of it.
Really young. It's super young. I don't think we realize how influenced we are from a very young age.
Right. And when people don't speak up to do what's necessary and right, for example, like think about all the people. I was thinking of the Harvey Weinstein case recently, how so many people knew about it, but nobody said anything about it. You also have the fear, again, of being ostracized. But this is the problem with the group. I think you see it right now in society right now. I think you see it in our politics with this president about people not standing up and doing now there are some people that are standing up, even Republicans that are standing up. But you notice there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of people just going along with and this is honestly how it's happened in society before, when you saw fascist dictatorships arise. And this isn't just particular to just the right. This happens on the left too. When you see leftist governments, liberal governments come up, it's tribalism, and this is what you're seeing in society. And the problem with it is that oftentimes you could be just following along with what everyone else is doing. This is another reason why no one's immune from this, and I'm not saying I'm any more immune, but I try to think about things from two different points of view for that reason. You know what I mean? Because getting caught up with what the group is thinking and not being able to think for yourself as an individual may cause you to make irrational decisions. It doesn't mean you're always going to be perfect or you're not going to do that. We're all susceptible to it. But I do try, when I listen to somebody who has a point of view, or when I listen to a group supposedly that has the same point of view, is, do I know everything that person's saying? Do I agree with everything that person's saying? Do I understand what that person's saying? The reason why I do this too is because this is how cults basically take advantage of people too. When you look at cult behaviors, like most people, we talked about this on the podcast a little while ago, actually I think I talked about this with David McAfee last week, because he has a book called No Sacred Cows, and we talk about cults in there. Nobody wakes up saying, I'm going to join a cult today. Nobody decides that that's what they're going to do. But yet what they're doing is they're trying to be part of a group. You'll notice a lot of these people are usually ostracized in life. They usually have a lot of emotional problems, or they're looking for answers to something. And the problem is that, and I made a video about this too. The problem is when people use a technique called love bombing to get people into these groups. Now, our need to feel love, our need to be part of our need to be a part of a community, and a need to feel wanted. I'm sure this was a biological reason for us to develop, love and empathy and all these other things. The problem is that people start bombarding you with love. They start bombarding you with messages of like, oh, you're an important person, or we care about you, or we, blah, blah. But then that's how they start to control you. And then, like I said in the video, it's like a domestic violence relationship. It starts off as really good. I mean, he's, giving you flowers all the time. He's being nice to you. And it doesn't mean everyone who's nice to you is a bad person. But what I'm trying to say is that they start bombarding you with love first, and then they start manipulating you. And then it's hard for you to get out of that situation. It's hard for you to think differently about it because, again, you're susceptible to the group.
Well, what they end up doing is using that very same love that they have for you, and they use it against you. They
Right.
use it as what they'll end up doing is withholding it. They'll say, well, in order now for you to earn that love that you thought was so freely given, you have to do X, Y, Z. All of a sudden, all these conditions get placed upon you when you're usually with cults. When it comes to like just regular groups and groupthink, those are usually situation dependent and community dependent, not necessarily cult like behavior. I don't know a whole lot of Democrats that are going to be like, come join us because we love you. Like they don't usually do that.
Well, they do because it could be a common cause. It doesn't have to necessarily be like they love them, but
right.
there's either a common
in a
cause
cult they do,
or survivalism.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like you tend to notice a lot of these even the political cults. It's in fact, you're likely to join a cult from either a social issue. A lot of people get into it because of
usually
social issues too.
It's usually religion and wanting to feel special. That's usually what it is. When you join a cult, it's usually because you want to do something special. Like you are made to feel like you're doing something special and that you yourself are special.
Well, the thing is that if you really look at what a religion is just it's just a larger cult is what it was. It is. And I know people don't want to hear that. That's really what it is. In fact, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they all started off as cults. If you look at the time of even Christianity back, when it started to develop. In fact, we brought Richard Carrier on the show. Maybe I'll bring him back on to talk about this again. But if you guys go listen to the podcast that I did with Richard Carrier a while back ago, when he says,
Jesus real?
Is Jesus real? And is Christianity a myth? He was bringing up the fact that there was a lot of different schools of thought that were happening the same time that Jesus was. He wasn't the only unique person around that time that was giving these messages. In fact, there was another religion that was starting to develop that was even bigger than him that had the same, risen from the dead.
Was that the one with Mithra?
No, that was years before. I'm saying at the same time that Jesus was alive. There was actually other schools of thought that were happening. And it just happened to be that once enough people started to gravitate towards Christianity, which really the only main reason why that they did was because of the Roman Empire. And again, you have a groupthink mentality. Everybody thought, okay, here's how we can control people. Here's how we can, utilize. It's kind of like the same thing what Islam's going through right now. Now they're starting to run within groups. And I'm not trying to be Islamic phobic here. Not every Islamic person is going to go out and be a terrorist. But when they are terrorists, they're doing it of a political groupthink mentality. They're a lot of these people, again, are ostracized. They're usually young men. Some of these men are actually very smart people. But their mentality gets caught up in this terroristic thought process, and it's not just religion. People think I'm always trying to pick on religion. I'm like, I'm actually not. I'm picking up on bad ideas and groupthink mentality because again, this can happen politically. We see political cults that aren't even religious. Look at like Mao, for example, or Stalin. Like, there's atheistic communities. Now, they didn't do it out of atheism, and I hate it when people say this. They're like, "Oh, see, there's atheistic religion." No, that's not what happened. Basically, it's a political state that became the cult. Okay, it was a political type of a religion is really what it was. It wasn't based off of atheism. There is no tenet to atheism. Okay, just like there's no tenet to not believing in unicorns. Like there's no doctrine about not believing in unicorns. But what these people were doing were the same thing that religion was doing. They were basically utilizing our evolutionary process of groups, survivalism. Okay, the groupthink mentality, the us versus them. This is how genocides happen without the world too. This is how genocides actually do happen. Is when not only are you in the group, but you start to dehumanize the other group. You start to not even have empathy and compassion for them anymore because you've dehumanized them. That you no longer see them as a human. So again, you're going along with what this group is saying over here, and then it's hard for people to speak out once that group gets larger and larger and larger. So this is how civil wars break out. This is how genocide happens. So again, and even if you weren't going to look at this politically, right, there's still consequences for going along with the group. For example, a perfect example is like Enron. Enron is a perfect example of people who saw the collapse. There was this lie that kept happening with Enron over and over and over, and no one would question it. No one would say anything about it. Yeah, everybody thought they were the next big, business out there. They were like the top of their game, and we see this all the time. We see this with corporations and businesses. We look at people like Bernie Madoff. I don't know if he was a group more thing, but Enron
No.
was. Enron was definitely a group mentality, and no one was questioning it until it was too late. And that's the problem is that in those situations, those are the dangers and the consequences is that when these groups start acting nefariously and start doing things and people not speaking up against them or not doing what they should be doing to say something against it, it creates large consequences.
I think you brought up a really good point about just jumped out of my head. Wow. Okay. Not really sure. I'm like, I don't know. Your point was why I think, when groups get bigger and bigger. That's what it was. I think that sometimes groups evolve, and that's the thing that people don't necessarily take into consideration when they join. Like sometimes you could join a really small group, and then next thing you know, it's got thousands or hundreds of thousands of members, and you may have started out with some sort of, well-intentioned thing that brought the group together, and it starts to shift and change. And you see that too when a group will oust someone in power. So whoever started the group, maybe they started it for a really good reason, and then someone comes in and looks at that person in power and says, actually, I could take control of this group and use it for their own means, realizing that they have all these minds that they can actually take and manipulate. And so how we learn to think for ourselves and how we learn to question people in authority, which I think we should always be allowed to do. And I think you should always be allowed to question the group, or at least know how to question yourself enough to be like, okay, am I thinking this way because of what the influence is around me, or is this actually my own thought processes just kind of being magnified by other people?
You know what the other problem is too is that you're talking about people trying to overtake the group. A lot of times revolutionaries, and I say this all the time, the revolutionaries become the tyrants.
Mm-hmm. They do.
And you see this all the time. And I bring this up all the time, like with George Orwell's Animal Farm, like how there was a group, even though, I mean, it's a allegory because it's animals, but basically there was a certain set of animals that wanted to overtake the humans, but then they started acting just like the humans. And you see this in revolutions all the time. You see it in a lot of political revolutions where the revolutionary becomes the same as the tyrant. And I worry about that in this country. I worry about a lot of people who are wanting change in this country, which might be necessary and which is good, but are going to start becoming just like the monster that they're trying to overcome, And we have to worry about groups also when it comes to, like, even right now, like on social media. For example, we have algorithms that force you, not force you, but they do. It is. They kind of force you into just seeing what you want to see all the time. And then now I think more people are starting to go into more to Facebook groups than even in their own pages. Like people are starting to become more diversified in their own echo chambers. And that's the problem right now with the groups is now people are only hearing their side of the view, and that's another reason why, like I said, I think I said this last week too, that I try my best when I can to look at other people's point of view when I can. I will watch something that has a different point of view. I keep bringing this up because I want people to get used to checking what they think that they know about things. It doesn't mean I'm always going to be open to it. Some people send me shit that I'm like, I either probably seen or I know is already bullshit, But what I'm saying is most of the time I do try to look at another point of view. In fact, we have a couple videos up right now that were previously unreleased interviews that were going to be in the film and weren't. So I made them completely full length, unedited. And the only time I edited is like if it was a personal matter or the battery went out or whatever, but they didn't make the film. Now, some people ask, well, why didn't they make the film? Well, one, we ran out of budget and time or whatever, but it wasn't even that. It was originally we tried to have an editor on the film, and I wanted a non-biased editor, someone who could look at both points of view. And I knew that if I edited the film, there's always going to be a bias that's there, whether I like it or not. Even if I didn't have a bias to anything, and I'm not purposely, everybody has a bias. I try my best to not have one. But even if I did, someone's still going to accuse me of being biased. So I just thought it was better to just leave all of them out of it because of it. You know what I mean? Plus, I just didn't have, like I said, I felt it would have been better if it was more of an objective a point of view if we would have had the editor, but we couldn't get an editor to actually do that. So I had to edit the film myself.
Right.
So I'd rather just take it from my point of view. But what I did with these interviews was I did the full interview. Because like, most of the time you make a film, you're basically shooting an hour, 2 hours of an interview and you're cutting it down to a small chunk. So basically when you watch our documentary, you're seeing the edited version, just sound clips from people. So what I did with this one was a different point of view, was I had the whole conversation. So you basically saw us shooting the entire, interview with them, and I put those online. In fact, I just recently put one up too. They're called Conversations of Belief, by the way. If you go to my YouTube channel at Fama Media Productions, youtube.com/Fama Media Productions. Point I'm trying to make is that you can see in these conversations, I do try to listen to another person's point of view. I try to understand where's this person coming from. And I think that the problem with our groups and our groupthink mentality is we're not good at diversity. We're not good at understanding other types of points of views. We're not good at understanding different points of different ideas, which is why I think it's hard for us. I think we're becoming more tribalistic and animalistic in our behavior. I think that's natural for us in groups. In fact, if you look at prisons, in states of fear, when people are in the most states of fear, they tend to gravitate more towards the groups that they're from. Right. So, for example, in prison, a lot of people will turn to their race because that's the most primitive, that's the most identifiable thing that you can see without having to talk to people, that you can say, okay, well, people tell you when they go to prison that they're not necessarily racist when they get in there. Some of them come out racist. Some of them are racist. But what I'm saying is that it's just tribalism. And it's not just with race. I mean, for example, look at societies and cultures where they're going through civil war. They'll go into their groups that they know. Look at like Islam. Where they have the Shiites and the Sunnis. Like anytime there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, people start retreating into what's familiar to them. And I think that's what you're seeing in America right now, is that there's so much uncertainty and there's so much fear that everyone's starting to retreat into their political, Republican, Democrat, this, that. You know what I mean? And that's what we need to start addressing is this groupthink, and saying that's not always the best way for us to manage how we live. I think,
as you're talking, I'm thinking about high school, because that's really when I think about, so I started thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, so when I was a little kid, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way through elementary school, I didn't, I think I learned about cliques or the popular crowd by about third or fourth grade. So I started to realize like groups then. But it wasn't really until high school that I saw the segregation happen that you're referring to, that happens because of fear and being in prison and all these things. But I'm like, no, it happens in high school. That's where it really does.
It probably didn't help that our high school looked like a women's prison.
Well, yeah, our high school looked like a prison.
That was always the joke. People always said, "Does it look like a prison?" Right.
Hi, Jeremy. But anyway, basically, what I was thinking is that if it starts out that young, right? If it starts out when we our brains are still developing, it's no wonder that we become this way the older that we get. I mean, I'm thinking about all the groups, and how I always tried to be like, I guess I was a little social butterfly, because I used to flip between all the different groups. Like I was a choir kid, but I was also a nerdy kid, and I also hung out with the popular kids, and I also hung out with the creative crowd, and I hung out with break dancers, and I hung out with gang members, and I hung, like, when I think about all the different groups that I exposed myself to, but yet rarely anyone else did. Like when I look at my big majority of friends, and then I look at how they were all specified to those particular pockets and those particular groups. And it really solidifies now, even into adulthood. You just turned 40. I'm going to turn 40 this year. And when I look at all of those same friends that I still keep in contact with, they're all still a lot the same.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've maintained those particular groups or stayed within those particular groups. It's quite fascinating to me.
Also, when it comes to groups, is the one thing you have to understand too is the way when people grow up, certain people in certain areas of the country never were exposed to other groups, and that's what I feel is different from where we grew up. We grew up in Las Vegas, so we were always exposed to many different types of cultures, many different types of groups. I mean, I'm sure there was racist people in Vegas, obviously, but
there are.
but it wasn't prevalent, is what I'm saying. You almost couldn't do that because there were so many different types of groups. So for me, it was natural for me to be around all different types of people and whatever. Whereas for other people, it's not natural for them. They're not around it. So they're more prone to being biased. They're more prone to, being judgmental. Whereas, I mean, also being from Vegas, no one gives a shit about anything you do. You know what I mean? Like literally you can walk up the street with a fucking, bird on your head naked down the street and people are like, oh, okay.
That's very true.
I mean, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit more open-minded to just many, like I hate racism. I hate, I really do. I hate judgmental people, but that's also because I grew up where most people didn't give a shit about what you did. As long as you left people alone and, and I mean, everyone's fucking weird in fucking Vegas. You know what I mean? But again, I don't feel like I belong to any real group. I can't really say. I mean, I went through a lot of phases myself. Went through my stoner rock phase, my hip hop phase, my trendy preppy phase. But I never really felt like
I still can't. I can't see you as a.
Yeah, I was all that shit, but I didn't fit into. I don't feel like I fit in any groups, Like in high school, I felt like I was pretty fucking dorky. I was very outlandish. I was a bad fucking student. I kept getting kicked out of school and fucking suspended, and you know what I mean. But
not me. I was the good kid.
Yeah, well, I wasn't for fucking sure, but I wasn't really bad. I didn't run with I knew people in really bad groups, but I still knew when to draw the line too. Where I knew, I mean, I don't know what it was. It was a point where there was just, there's a boundary that I had. I didn't looking back, I realized that, but even though I knew friends that did things that were really fucked up and hung around a lot of people that did a lot of fucked up shit. I even went to an alternative school where it was all like the fucking losers of fucking Las Vegas, all the gang members and the pregnant teenage kids and stuff,
Yeah.
But I was one of those people, you know what I mean? But the reality is there was still a boundary to where I do with the group. So I think I've always had this mentality that I never felt like I fit within groups. So I've always learned to...
Me too.
I've always tried to think for myself. I think even as an adult, I don't really feel like I fit in a lot of groups. I mean, I'm a registered independent. I mean, I tend to lean more left, but I have conservative values just as much as I have democratic values. I have Democratic and Republican friends. I have Christian and atheist friends. I have New Age. And, I mean, I have so many different types of even, if you look at my friends list, it's diverse. I have gay, straight, black, white, Mexican, but it's because I don't feel like even as an atheist and skeptic, I always don't feel like I fit into the group, all the time too. So yeah. I feel like most of my thinking comes from me just observing a lot of things and being on my own more and learning on my own than being. Now, it doesn't mean I don't join groups and I don't, participate within groups. I do. It's just I don't feel like I do that very often, And I'm a very introverted person. I mean, the older that I get, the less I'm really wanting to be around fucking people, to be honest with you, And it's not that I hate people. I do hate some fucking people, but I mean, I'm just like most people. Like you get older and you just don't really want a lot of bullshit in your life. You know what I mean? And I enjoy my solitude, but I do like being around friends and family and certain types of organizations and groups. So I'm very thankful for that. But I don't feel like I particularly fit within a certain type of group. But I think that what that's allowed me to do, and I think a lot of thinkers that are out there that way, they tend to be in isolation more, and they tend to learn to think about thoughts and ideas more when they're that way. They're less prone to being influenced by just, and I think the other thing is too, is that I think we were talking about this the other day. I think I was asked this at, so I just had a screening of our film in Michigan. Center for Inquiry did a screening out there, and I did a virtual Q&A. And there was a lady that asked me a question in the Q&A, and she said, well, how did you come out to your family as an atheist?
Right.
And luckily, I didn't have parents that were that judgmental, even though, my dad was Catholic and my mom was New Age, and obviously they divorced when I was really young, so I didn't have to worry about, But I also, what I also didn't mention is that I didn't give a shit what people thought anyway. You know what I mean? Like I was the type of person, if you didn't like me, who the fuck I was, you probably weren't going to be in my life. Like, you know what I mean? So if my parents, I mean, I'm very thankful that my parents were judgmental in that way. I mean, I'm sure, maybe they're not super happy, but I'm saying they weren't like super judgmental when I see other people. But if they were, they wouldn't be in my life. you know, and most people that are not in my life are super judgmental, and I don't have time for super judgmental groups or people that are like, oh, well, Ben, blah, 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 you need to be like this and do whatever. Well, fuck you. I don't really care. You know what I mean? But I think what that allows you to do is to think as an individual. And ever since I've been learning about skepticism and learning about like how to think critically, I'm not perfect at this, but I try my best when I'm in a group situation or not just in a group situation. When I see the zeitgeist going on with people being upset, like on Facebook about news stories and Twitter shout outs and all this other bullshit, right? I try to think objectively sometimes. Sometimes I don't give a fuck. I'm going to post, you know, whatever the fuck I feel. But I try to think about situations outside of what the entire group is thinking. And I think that's a big problem these days when you see these Twitter swarms of people and these groups of people that come on your social media, and you see this everywhere, where now you're vindicated out in the public when you say one wrong thing or somebody misinterprets it or something happens, and then like everybody's bombarding you with news articles and comments and shit.
Right, and telling you how wrong you are.
Yeah, and I don't give a fuck. Like I literally don't even care anymore. You know what I mean? Like you could post shit on my fucking YouTube, on my Amazon. I don't care. I don't really give a shit, you know? But I'll just say how I feel. But, you know, when there's a situation, for example, a lot of times when there's officer involved shootings, for example, right? Maybe everybody's thinking this one way over here, but I'm trying to think of it more objectively. And it pisses people off. Like they argue with me about it and they're like, oh my God, why are you thinking that way?
Well,
and to me, I'm just trying to look at it as objective as I can. It doesn't mean I'm 100% correct and that I know. I'm just trying to look at it as objective as I can. And so I look at it from both sides is what I'm trying to say. And sometimes people aren't doing that because they're caught in that mentality, you know?
People don't want you. People want you to choose a side.
Right.
People naturally want for everyone to be on whatever side that they've chosen. It's
Right.
when you stand up and say, I'm not choosing a side, and you say, I'm actually going to be an independent thinker, and I might agree with you in this one instance and then agree with another person over here in a different instance. People don't like that because it creates cognitive dissonance for them.
Right.
Because then they have to start questioning themselves and saying, oh, you know, is what I'm doing, you know, beneficial? And I think, you know, sometimes being in a group is okay. You know,
Yeah,
I don't think that every group or getting caught up in, you know, some group things, like if you're at a concert and you're all having a great time and you know you're caught up in the moment and, you know, things like that. Like, I don't think that I don't want anyone to take away from this and say, okay, oh my gosh, I should always question every single thing. I mean, you should question a lot of things, especially if there's like nefarious means going on. But I don't think that every single group thing is always bad.
Well, it's not that it's bad, but you just need to know when to think as an individual. And
right,
you need
like
to
what your boundaries are.
I mean, there's plenty of books throughout time that showed the power of the group and knowing when in that situation. And I really want to talk about it just because of, I mean, just even the situation that's going on in America right now, right? Everyone's stuck in their political camps. And then there's people right now that will not question this administration at all. And then they think, oh, you're a liberal if you question it. Right. And I always try to tell people, like, especially when I tell it, you know, because there are Republicans that are questioning it. There's Republicans that don't agree with what Donald Trump is doing. And that's good that they do it. And I always try to tell people, just because you question someone in your group doesn't mean you agree with the other side either. Like, if you're a Republican and you don't agree with the shit that Donald Trump does, it doesn't make you a liberal. Okay.
No.
And that's the problem. And look, I have criticisms of the fucking left too. And the left gets pissed off at me because I fucking call out their bullshit too. They're like, well, are you conservative or are you left or you right? I'm like, look, I'm just trying to think of I'm not just trying to find a middle ground for the sake of middle ground. I'm just trying to find what is the best possible answer. It doesn't mean I'm not always going to be correct, but I'm also trying my best to figure out what is the most probable outcome for it. And it doesn't mean that my views won't grow or change. In fact, we were watching a video. When I interviewed Betsy Chasse, I was criticizing atheists that were talking about feminism. You know what I mean? And I've evolved since then. You know what I mean? I'm not anti-feminist, but I do have problem with certain parts of feminism. But I'm pro-feminist just because I support women's rights, all the things that women are fighting for. But I now see the arguments that people have against these newer feminists that are out there, which back then I didn't really get. So some people might see a video from years ago and be like, oh, but you said this. And it's like, yeah, but I've evolved. I don't know why we punish people for evolving our points of view. But again, people want to compartmentalize it. They're like, well, are you pro-feminist or anti-feminist? I'm like, right. I'm both. Like,
it's black and white thinking.
Yeah, it's black and white thinking. And I try my best to not do it when I can. It's the same thing with guns. I'm pro guns, but I'm also pro regulation, right? You know, I mean, like, I hate this group mentality that you have to be one or the other, right? You know, people are like, well, you're only Black Lives Matter, or only Blue Lives Matter. No. I'm not. I'm actually both. And then people say, well, you can't say all lives matter. Well, the fuck, you can't say that. Now, I get there are racist, stupid fucking people hiding behind all lives matter.
Right.
I'm not one of those fucking idiots. Like, that's where we need to stop compartmentalizing people in groups. Just because people say all lives matter doesn't mean that you're part of these idiot fucking racists out here. To me, I support Black Lives Matter for the same reason why I support Blue Lives Matter, because I believe if you solve both the problems, and they're both unique problems on their own, but the more you solve them, maybe they actually help both. Like, they actually will help both parties. And that's what we need to start thinking along those lines of saying that, how do we look at these as individual problems? But if there's things that come together and they're able to be solved, maybe that could help both parties. And it shouldn't be an us versus them all the time. Now, I still have an us versus them mentality for a lot of shit that I do, but I do.
So does that make you a hypocrite?
Yeah, I guess so. You know what I mean? But everyone's a hypocrite to an extent. We just have to try to not be as hypocritical as possible, right?
Okay.
I mean, we're all guilty of being hypocrites, but I think we could do a better job of not trying to be one. And at least I could admit that I can be a hypocrite. And I try to work on it as much as I can, but I'm also honest in saying that there's times where, yeah, it's a cognitive dissonance for me too. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, so I support this idea, but that's why critical thinking is hard. It's hard to, I mean, sometimes you're going to clash with your own thinking and be like, okay, well, I think this way about it and not this. But that's why people need to work on it. But just going along with what the group's doing because it's the lowest common denominator, or that's what the emotions of everybody in the group is doing, that's not any better. That's really harmful, hypocritical, saying like, oh, I'm just going to go along because everyone else is saying that.
You brought up a good point just now in terms of emotion. I think that our emotions are what obviously are our short circuit and what drives us to do certain things. And I watched a great TED Talk today that talked about how emotion and logic aren't necessarily incompatible like we like to think, but they're actually things that are that should complement each other. So like, if you feel like you're being emotionally pushed to do something, allow logic in. Why you're smiling at me?
Because you said pushed, and I thought about the documentary we were talking about earlier. So,
but honestly, that's really, I think this notion that we need to create the divide between emotion and logic, and that if you're emotional, then there's no room for logic, and that's not true. I think you should allow one logic to come through, right? And then recognize the emotion that's pushing that, and vice versa. So if you've got an emotional state that you're in, you need to allow logic to kind of come in and say, okay, am I doing this in a logical manner? And
right.
And it shouldn't be this the push pull, the black and white that we've created, because a lot of these groups that are out there that have come up in recent years, like Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and all of the why can't I say that word?
I was gonna try, but then I figure if I fuck up, it's gonna be even worse. So politicization.
Yes,
whatever.
Wow, neither one of us can say it. Okay,
we need Grammarly for podcasts.
Yes, we do. But anyway, so. My point is that a lot of those feel emotion based, and then they come in and they try to make logical statements, right? They try to use whatever reasoning that they have, but a lot of it, if you question that reasoning, you are automatically labeled an enemy.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't use it. And I see it in the fucking memes that people post. They're just using emotion. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people will hear me say, don't let emotions override logic. I'm not anti-emotional. I think emotions are an extremely important factor in your well-being, especially when it comes to mental health, right? The problem I have is when you let your emotions get in the way of facts. That's when I have a problem, is when you basically, I'm not trying to say shut down emotions, but you also need to also know when your emotions are, and I see people posting fucking memes all the time on Facebook and Twitter and everything else that are just pure emotion, and they're the worst. Like, you know, I mean, I saw, especially recently when, well, I'm not going to get into it recently. I'm just saying that people will post the dumbest fucking memes as an explanation to why their political position is correct on both the left and the right. And we talked about this a while back ago, but it drives me apeshit. And it's all emotional. It's all emotional. They're like, oh, I relate to that. Boom. You know, and I do that too. I mean, I post shit all the fucking time that's based off emotion. I'm not saying I'm emotionalist. I am very emotional. But when it comes down to actually solving problems, when you're going to get serious about solving problems, you need to learn to also shut down that emotional part and or not shut it down, but also learn to be aware when it could be getting in the way of logical reasoning and actual emotional reasoning and being able to understand, how do I solve the actual problem? And that's what we don't have. We don't have fucking people, right? Like, look at right now with this goddamn administration. He's running completely on fucking emotion. There's no logic in any of his processing. And this is the problem that I have with him. People think, well, I'm just trying to pick on him because he's a fucking Republican or something. No. Okay, I know a lot of like smart Republicans that I may not always agree with some things, and there are things I do agree with them about, but I can have an intellectual conversation with them. I can't fucking have that with someone like this fucktard or someone like fucking Alex Jones. Okay? Alex Jones is pure fucking emotion. That motherfucker is a fucking Looney Tune. Like, he thinks fucking like people are demons and shit. Like, that's not logic and fucking reasoning. And people, we need to start fucking valuing it for that reason. I mean, we're getting so caught up in this emotional state of, you know, whatever, because we want to believe what we want to believe, and we don't even understand the actual problems. We think it's fucking demons or the New World Order or that 9/11 was an inside job, and now the world is fucking flat again. You know, it's just, we need to fucking get better at this shit, because again, if we're serious about solving fucking problems.
But again, it's the group. So going back to groupthink, people feeling like they need to belong somewhere, those things, especially conspiracy theory groups, are now becoming cult-like, because when you join some sort of conspiracy theory group or a group like the Flat Earthers, you're made to feel special. And you have some sort of special secret.
They're woke.
Where they have some sort of special secret knowledge that, you know, no one else can see. And when you start playing to that emotional base, that is really where the danger comes in. And that's when anti-intellectualism, that, as we've seen, just continues to rise. I'm starting to get dizzy.
Yeah. You okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I was going to bring up too was, like in this town, the cult-like behavior. I live in Sedona, Arizona. I was reading over some posts that when I was criticizing the vortexes here, and when I was criticizing the climate change, when I was saying that, you know, climate change is real, and that fuck ass, whoever his name is, I'm not going to mention on this podcast, who wanted to fucking dox me and post my fucking personal information online. He was so pissed off that I was fucking calling him out on his fucking bullshit. You know, that he wanted to fucking show my personal information. But the mentality here in this fucking town is cult-like. And that's why, if you look, you can actually do research on this. This town is prone to fucking cult behavior. In fact, there's a news, I think it was out of Phoenix, that there was a news segment that they showed how Sedona is completely prone to cult-like behavior. And look how they just ran that fucking dude, Benito Massaro, out of this town. You know, he's trying to start his own fucking cult here and bullshit. You know what I mean? And there's been tragedies that have happened here in Sedona for that exact reason. And that's why I question it. And they don't like people like us here. They don't like people. I'm not saying everybody. And I want to make sure that I'm clear about this, because I don't want to start like this kind of us versus them mentality and saying, look, we do know spiritual people here that are really good people. We know people that may have a different point of view than us that we're good friends with, and they're not assholes. But we all can recognize that there's a problem in this town when it comes to groupthink mentality, when it comes to pseudoscience and spiritualism and this other anti-science way of thinking. We have people that were on the city council here that were anti mental health and antidepressant and all this other bullshit. Like, so how many times did I go to a city council meeting where people are talking about, they want the city council to address chemtrails. And we see this on YouTube videos where people are going to their city councils and their governments wanting people to investigate fucking bullshit ass chemtrails, which there's no evidence for. Okay. So again, you got to be careful about these fucking groups that you're a part of, the documentaries and the groups and the pages you read and the people you associate yourself with. Because and I think that's why a lot of us were believers, is we got caught up in these groups and we got caught up in these videos. And I think what's even worse is when you are isolating. Maybe this is going to kind of contradict what I said, but sometimes when you're isolating, you'll more likely follow things with blinders on them. So you got to be careful. Just because you're isolated doesn't mean you're any more immune. I'm not telling people to be isolated, but I think if you're going to think about your positions and where you sit on a position in life, you're probably more likely to do it when you separate yourself from the group and think about it more critically, or you have the time to think about it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't interact with groups or you shouldn't talk with people, and you should look at different points of view. But I tend to find that a lot of times when I extract myself from the group and I try to think about these things. And this is hard because there's a lot of positions you think you're very certain about, and you tend to find that you're not as certain as you think that you are. It's not that you're not certain, but you don't know really where you stand on it. And so I think it creates a level of cognitive dissonance in our heads for that reason. And so again, you've got to learn to be able to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's also what it requires as an individual, for you to be uncomfortable in a situation where you're surrounded in a group mentality and you're going along with what everyone else is saying to do. It's hard. It's harder than you think. It's even hard for me sometimes. I don't think anyone is completely immune from it, but you've got to learn to stand up and say, I've got to think different, especially when it fucking matters, so anyways, any final thoughts or?
Not really. No. Okay.
All right. Well, anyways, if you guys get a chance, check out the show from Darren Brown. Darren Brown's The Push on Netflix. It's a great show on the power of the group and what you or wouldn't do, and how far would you go in those situations. So let us know what you guys think. If you're watching this on the replay, or even if you're live here, let us know what you guys think, especially if you saw it. If you want to come back and leave some comments, I'll answer them and see what you guys thought. And if you guys have any comments, any questions or anything, put it in the notes below, in the comments below, and I'd love to read them and see what's going on. And if you like this show, make sure you subscribe. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. If you are on iTunes and Stitcher, make sure you subscribe. And please share if you guys enjoyed the show today. And if you have any comments, any questions, or any show ideas, let us know. Hit me up at benfamajr.com. So that is the show for today. So I guess we'll see you next week. Mm-hmm. Okay. So peace out, people. Or not.
You've been listening to Reality Trip with Ben Fama Jr. Check out more great content by visiting benfamajr.com.